असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मा अमृतंगमय ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. Hope you are all able to see the presentation that is being shared.
Yes, Abhi.
Yes. Okay, let's continue. So last week, just a quick recap of last week's session. Mainly what we have understood is that being born as human beings, we all are empowered to have the ability to choose. This is the unique nature which differs us from all the living beings. And being given the choice, we have the right to choose. You have the right to do things in a right way or wrong way. But what we need to be mindful about is our choice have consequences. So you have right to choose. At the same time, you have to bear the consequences of your choice. You cannot simply blame others for things going bad if you have chosen a certain thing. And what all we can choose? We can choose our thoughts, we can choose our feelings, we can choose our actions, and we can choose whether to respond, how to respond to the situations. And that's why we need to be wise when we choose, because we are going to face the consequences of our choices. And also we understood that the book of Bhagavad Gita is nothing but an instruction manual or human actions instruction manual. At times when we don't know how to do or the right way of performing human actions is outlined in detail in the book of Bhagavad Gita. So it helps us to convert every breakdown to breakthrough, because the story started, or the Bhagavad Gita started, when Arjuna was in depression or he was totally breakdown, and he says that he is not able to fight the war. And at the end of this session, which we can call it as a psychiatric session which Krishna gave to Arjuna, at the end he gets the enlightenment and he starts going against Kauravas and fighting the war, and it ends up on their side. So finally, we ended up seeing that why we have to go to Bhagavad Gita is because it has a reason, it has a logic, and it has conclusion. And the study of Gita, or the who has to read Gita, means it's a universal application because it is a branch of Vedanta. Vedanta is nothing but knowing who we are. So the essential nature of the self, knowing the essential nature of the self is the crux of Vedanta. And Bhagavad Gita is a extract of all the information from all the Upanishads. And when we go from verse 1 to verse 700, by the end of it, you would have got the most of the essence. As we cannot have time spending a lot of time reading all the Vedas or Upanishads, we take this book as our resource for knowing about self or for self-realization. So it has reason, it has logic, and it has conclusion. And many a times when Krishna tells to Arjuna, he gives in the terms of logic, he sometimes gives it in the form of an emotional appeal. He persuades him, sometimes he goes to the level of personal appeal, and sometimes he starts instilling fear in Arjuna for doing certain actions or for not doing certain actions. And so we are going to internalize whatever is going to be said in the Bhagavad Gita. It's not a literal meaning we take, and all the people represented there, we take it as a symbolism and see how we could apply it to solve the internal battle that happens within us. So let's come to the today's topic. What is my aim in life? So you can feel free to tell me, what is your aim in life? What do you want to achieve in your life?
I want to be happy. That's my aim.
Just happy?
Yeah, happy.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would like to be peace of mind with no stress and no, baggage in the head that something is happening, something is going to happen, the ambiguity, insecurity, and health. These are
Okay.
important. Yeah.
Okay.
I think I just want to be in the present
Okay.
at this moment. That is the
Okay.
most difficult thing I feel. Yeah, I've
Sure.
been trying over the years, but it's so difficult.
Okay. So in the world, when we analyze the whole world, there are two sets of people. One, people are very, very dynamic. When we say dynamic, they are passionate. They want to achieve this. I want name, I want fame. It could be anything, nothing in the wrong sense, but they are at the back of something. Every moment they have that enthusiasm flowing in them that they want to achieve something. If this is finished, what next? What next? What more can I do? So such a set of people are can be categorized under the people who are dynamic. So we all, most of the times, are dynamic, right? Like we are not sitting idle. And there are second set of people who are tranquil or who wish to be tranquil all the time. I can quote an example, like my grandmother and all, they all come under this category. When you go and ask them, they say that they are very much happy and contented with whatever they have or they had. And if you go and ask them, what do you want? What do you want to be in your life? They say nothing. I'm happy with what I am. I just want you all to be happy. Your happiness is my happiness. So that is the set of people who are tranquil. And most of the times, people who are dynamic has to come and contact the external world. They have to face challenges. And during the time they face challenges, they have a lot of ups and downs. They will get stress. And when in dynamism, stress is a common factor. And when you are tranquil, they really don't want to be active. Meaning, if you ask them, what do you want to achieve in life? They say there is nothing much they want to do. They are just happy the way they are. So such people come under tranquility. But if you see, if both can be mixed, if dynamism and tranquility can be mixed, because the current state of all of us is we are all actors. You didn't mention the point of dynamism, but if you see, every one of us are working in our own aspect of life, meaning that we are not just sitting idle all the time. So we are working. It could be a housewife or it could be a person going to office or doing any kind of work. We are all dynamic. But what you are looking for is tranquility. So most of the answers which you gave refers to the tranquility. So you're dynamic and you are looking for tranquility. And Bhagavad Gita teaches this very beautifully in a very structured way. And when you ask, is dynamic tranquility or tranquil dynamism a myth? It's not at all a myth. It can be achieved through constant practice by a systematic study. And that's what we will see how. So Gita is like any medical thing, like a medicine. Medicine is called a systematic study. No one goes to correspondence course for medicine because it has to be, the theory has to be understood properly. They have to go through the practicals properly, and then only they have to go through the specializations, and then they can experiment on people. In the same way, the study of Gita is very systematic because it first lets us know the baby steps, like what is first that we need to understand. Next, what do we need to understand? It gives us the perfect way to help everyone climb the ladder step by step. And this is just asking you, like you might all feel, how will I know that whatever is in Bhagavad Gita, I said achieving dynamic tranquility is not a myth. It can be achieved through the application of the essence of Bhagavad Gita. You might wonder, why should I believe this? Or how is this possible? Is it true that we can achieve? Then the answer to that is, we will see. Suppose I give, or you come across a book, which is a strength training for fat loss. You don't know this author. This is the totally first time you're seeing the book. After going through the book, how will you believe that whatever the person has written is true? Because of the photo, will you believe that whatever written there is true?
Or maybe we are just aiming for that. Whatever comes in our way, we feel that I think it works. He says as per my experience. So our mind tends to start believing because we want to achieve it, and we read something which comes across to us. We feel that I think it might work to me also. So we want
It
to
might
try.
work for you. Yeah, you will try. But how do you confirm whether it is true or not? You'll try.
Yeah, that confirmation we cannot really have, but maybe he'll give some references of some doctor, or maybe the real people whom they met or they tried. Some quotes maybe he would have mentioned in the book, which gives us evidence that it might be
So
true.
this book has 10 exercises only. Inside this book have 10 exercises to work out every day for 20 minutes, and you will lose the fat.
Okay.
When such a book is there, and you have to actually know the truth of the thing, the only way is to apply yourself and see. Meaning that
Correct.
you need to go through exercise by exercise, take to the T what is given there, work out, and once the muscles start paining, when your stomach pains or whichever part you're working out, if it starts paining, it means that the fat is reducing. It starts working. That means it's working for you. This spiritual journey is also the same way. There is no need for you to believe because it's written in the book, it's told by Lord Krishna, or it is told by any person. The only way you can ascertain the truth is by testing it out yourself. Without testing yourself, you will not experience, and without experiencing, you cannot tell whether it is true or it's not true. So we have to understand the theory, then practice it. And once you practice it, you will realize, meaning the theory in the sense, in this example, the 10 exercises are the theory. You put into practice, then you get the pain, you see that your muscles are building up, and that takes you to the realization that this exercise has worked on this particular part, and this is true. The same way we have to take through the study of Gita by understanding the concepts, how to apply internally, not to word by word meaning or the literal meaning which is given, but to take the essence of what is said, which is applicable at the current point of time, and then practice it, and then it will automatically take you to realization. So principles and laws taught in Gita needs to be applied and experienced. And throughout Gita, what we do is only analysis. There is no place for criticism, meaning that you cannot say like, whatever I have done is wrong, or whatever you're doing is wrong. Absolutely no place for criticism. The only thing we do with the study of Gita is analysis. We always analyze. First, start analyzing your personality, your actions, your reactions, your responses. Once that analysis internalizes, it will show up in your attitude. And you will have the same kind of analysis in the external environment. And when you come to a state of analysis, you will never react to a situation because you analyze the situation first. When you start analyzing, then you start thinking. When you think, you will take a right action. So only thing is to analyze. We have 700 verses in Gita. If you ask what is important verse, there is no answer for that, because if I ask you, like, if you have a matchbox full of matchsticks and I ask you which matchstick gives fire, what will be your answer? Can you pick up any particular matchstick and say only this one gives fire? Then strike through?
No.
No.
So in the same way, the 700 verses of Bhagavad Gita is of utmost importance. Each one is like a matchstick embedded inside the cover of Bhagavad Gita. And when you strike it, what does it give you? It produces the fire of knowledge. Each shloka produces the fire of knowledge. So if anyone goes on a crash course or says that we can complete it in 3 days, only these chapters, this importance, that means you are not going through the proper base. You are not understanding the proper things, and that will not last long because you have not got the proper foundation of your self-study. So as we said in the previous slides, it's a systematic study. So you have to start from the verse 1 and progress till verse 700 to completely understand how it works. There are no shortcuts, there are no double promotions, and it's a step-by-step progression. And the step-by-step is again subject to individual. You can take baby steps, you can take big steps, but whatever step you take, it should be a very, very firm step. That means you have to totally realize that part and then move on to taking up the next part. And this is by Romana L. Anderson. She is an American writer. She has written that people spend a lifetime searching for happiness, looking for peace. They chase idle dreams, addictions, religions, even other people, hoping to fill their emptiness that plagues them. The irony is the only place they ever needed to search was within. But this is a beautiful quote which clearly explains that happiness and peace is within. Even though you search anything, any corner of the world externally, you will not be able to find happiness. And even you feel yourself happy, that would be a temporary thing, because if that external object disappears, it could be a person, it could be a thing or anything, you feel again you are lost. That's not a permanent happiness when you get that happiness from the external world. The happiness that you find within is the internal happiness, which is long lasted. And when we say self-study, we have two lines. One is AB. This represents the spiritual development, like how far or how much we progress in understanding ourselves. So the study of Bhagavad Gita helps us with the spiritual development. And C to D is on the scale of man's dependence on external world of happiness. So how much we are dependent on external world of happiness. And if you see the rating, if your spiritual development is 0, you are 100% dependent on the external world for happiness. Our aim is not to reach the 100%. We could have an aim where we can progress as much as we can, keeping the health as priority. Because when you don't set up any priority, you will not give time to work for it. So you need to have a goal. And I think everyone will accept if health is a first priority. So when you have to be healthy, you have to be healthy in terms of your physical fitness as well as your mental wellness. So if you have to be mentally well, you have to take up the spiritual development. So every day we have to spend at least some time, at least 10 minutes of self-study, analyzing ourselves so that we can become a better version of ourselves day after day. Once you progress up, what you try to feel is that the same situation, you live with same persons, you deal with same people, but you feel happy from within. The same situations which were a couple of years back, when you were not spiritually uplifted, will now seem different because you have changed in your attitude. When you internalize the things of self-learning, self-development, automatically your attitude changes, your perspective changes, and this perspective changes bring a different kind of response from you for the same action or for the same situation that happened earlier. And as we said, like the current studies in all the schools, universities, colleges, what they give is IQ. It is the intelligent coefficient. And by developing IQ, what we get is only knowledge, and it's not wisdom. And there is a very big difference between intelligence and our intellect. Intelligence is totally IQ, what we learn from books in terms of math, science, social, biology, and all. When it comes to intellect, it is how much we have applied in our personal life. For example, you can have a very great surgeon who is famous worldwide for his surgeries, but he could be a chain smoker, he could be a drunken person. In that case, we say that the person is knowledgeable, that person is highly intelligent, but intellectually very, very low, because he cannot, knowing whatever he has studies, he is not able to apply to himself. Whenever a patient comes, he will say with authority that smoking is injurious to health, you should not smoke and all. But when it comes to the self-application, he fails to do because his mind is weak, or he has certain weaknesses which he is not able to control. So that is intellect. The ability to think and control and drive your actions is intellect. The knowledge you gain from your studies, formally or informally, is your intelligence. And EQ is your emotional coefficient, which will help you in terms of managing and regulating your emotions. And spiritual coefficient is the coefficient which will actually help you to understand yourself. And the Bhagavad Gita would help us to have a fair bit of understanding on your physical body awareness as who we are, and also will help us to enhance our emotional coefficients and spiritual coefficients. And this is the last slide to end my introduction to Bhagavad Gita. These are two comments given by two famous people. One is Mahatma Gandhi and one is Aldous Huxley. He is also an English writer. So what Mahatma Gandhi has told is that when doubts haunt me, when disappointments stare me in the face, and I see not one ray of hope on the horizon, I turn to Bhagavad Gita and find a verse to comfort me, and I immediately begin to smile in the midst of overwhelming sorrow. Those who meditate on Gita will derive fresh joy and new meaning from it every day. So Mahatma Gandhi is one person who always used to take Gita as his go-to support for each and every problem or each and every sad days he had. At the same time, Aldous Huxley says that Bhagavad Gita is the most systematic statement of spiritual evolution of endowing value to mankind. It is one of the most clear and comprehensive summaries of perennial philosophy ever revealed. Hence, its enduring value is subject not only to India, but to all of humanity. As said in the last session, this is a universal philosophy which will help us build our personality. So with this, I conclude the introduction to Bhagavad Gita. Any questions you have, you can ask me at this point of time before I move to the chapter 1 today. Any questions?
No, Abhita.
So the first chapter is called Arjuna Vishada Yoga. Vishadam in Sanskrit is called like, it's like a depression. And yoga in Sanskrit means to reunite. It came from a Sanskrit word yuj, which means to unite. You might be wondering, what is there to unite? We are already there like that. When we say we have to unite, it clearly means that we have deviated from something and to which we are trying to bring it back. So the thing to understand is that we have moved away from our natural states. Universally, when you take a physical body, I start with physical body because you can understand it better. So for physical body, what is the natural state? It is the health. Health is the natural state of physical body. Until the time you have good health, there will be no issues, there will be no discomforts, there will be no uneasiness in our body. But once something happens or we are not totally healthy, we get, it might be a headache, it might be any problem, you tend to feel that uneasiness, you tend to feel that discomfort. So that's the time, what do you do when you're not well? We generally go to doctor, take some medicines, but does the doctor give you health or doctor solve you the problem of what you have? What does doctors do when we go to a doctor?
They give medicines to suppress your conditions.
Yeah, they give you medicines to suppress your conditions or better your conditions. So we believe that doctors gives us back the health. But the truth is, health is our natural state. So no one can give us back health because that is our natural state. What doctor does is to help us take away whatever illness we have by analyzing it, by addressing it and seeing the root cause of it. In the same way, our mental state, the natural mental state of the self is bliss. We are all totally uneasy. It's because most of you, whatever you said, is you are looking for happiness. We are looking for something. We are feeling uneasiness within us. We are not feeling good, completely good within us. We are not happy all the time because we have deviated from our natural state, which is the bliss. And this yoga, when we mean yoga here, when we follow all these things, what is the yoga that's going to happen? What is the union that's going to happen? Is we are going to our natural states. We are trying to move towards our natural state, which is the bliss. If you ask in Vedanta, they say we are Satchitananda Swarupam. We are our chit, our self is Anandam, always happiness, ever happiness. Once Ramana Maharshi, I don't know how many of you know Ramana Maharshi. So he is also a well-known masters in Tamil Nadu in Tiruvannamalai. One disciple goes and asks him, they call him like Bhagavan. Bhagavan sees, I see only sorrows in my life. I have never seen any kind of happiness. Everywhere, every part of your my life is only sad. Then Bhagavan immediately replies, where is the sorrow? In my world, I only have bliss. There is nothing else except bliss. So this clearly shows that if you transcend your mind, go above your intellect and realize your true self, what remains is the bliss. We need not go to that level because it really takes long time and you can also go. But the aim of my sharing sessions is at least we can try these things, keeping health as a priority. We can apply these things to elevate our intellect and to control the mind so that we will have a proper hormonal balance in our body, which will again add to our good health. And in this chapter, there are 6 kinds of divisions. The chapter firstly starts with the question asked by Dhritarashtra. And second is like Duryodhana describes the Pandava army. And the third is where they start preparing for the war. And the next part is Arjuna views the armies of both Pandavas and Kauravas and starts grieving at the 5th part. And finally, at the end of this chapter, he concludes that he cannot fight anymore. It is like the same thing. Suppose your, if our chappal size is 8, how will you feel if I buy you a chappal size which is 9 or a size that is 7? Will you feel comfortable?
No.
The same thing here, because we have moved out of our natural states, meaning that if our current size is 8, you have to always have 8 to feel comfortable. The same thing with physical body, which is health, and a mental body, which is bliss. As we have deviated, we are going through the practice of yoga, which is prescribed here to align back to our natural states. When mental alignment happens, physical alignments happen. So both should go hand in hand. So to understand our physical body, we all know we have a body. Our body is what contacts the external world. We act with our body. So body, mind, and intellect are the 3 instruments through which we contact this world or conquer this world. So body is our external personality. It's a physical, and 3 of them are matter. Body, mind, and intellect, 3 of them are matter. Body is to perceive and act. Mind is the realm of emotions and feelings. All whatever feelings come happens in our mind. And in Sanskrit, we call this as manas. And intellect is the instrument that helps us for discrimination and judgment. This is the thinking part, which tells us this is right, this is wrong, this is not right, or this is not wrong. So we have body, mind, and intellect. And above all body, mind, and intellect, we have something called as life force energy. It can be called as spirit, it can be called as Brahman, it can be called as Atman, it is called with different names. But the base is that The life force energy is the end living principle for us. Just having matter, matter is inert, meaning that matter is lifeless. We need a life giving principle to the matter to experience the life. Just as if you have a bulb and if the electricity doesn't pass through the bulb, will the bulb give out light? No. In the same way, for any matter to give out experience or to experience light, give out life, there needs to be a principle or the life force energy so that we can experience the world. So body, mind, and intellect, three of them are matter. Internal personality is composed of mind and intellect, and the external personality is our body. And when it comes to the hierarchy, the utmost important thing is the life force or spirit. Without life force or spirit, we cannot experience this world. And that's why it comes in the top. And intellect should be the one that has to control the mind. Mind should be the one that has to drive the body. If this hierarchy is maintained, we always do the right actions. And when we do right actions, we always get success and we always will be happy. The problem comes because the hierarchy in the midway gets corrupted, meaning that our mind overtakes or the mind controls our actions. So when our actions are controlled by mind, they will not always be the right thing because the mind is a realm of emotions and it doesn't think much. I like it, so I'm doing it. I don't like it, that's why I'm not doing it. And the other set of answer could be, I like it, but I'm not doing it because it's good for me. Or it could be the other way around. One could be with your discrimination or judgment, where you raise above your likes and dislikes and do it because it's either good for you or it's not either good for you. So when you do it with the intellect, with the right clarity of good or not good, then the hierarchy is being followed. But if you do a particular action with, and when you analyze yourself and your answer is, I do it because I like it. And not all the times our like and the good might differ, but in times you have a conflict between your like and your good, then you need to see which choice you have to make. For example, the simple example that we all understand is about a diabetic patient. If a diabetic patient likes sweets and indulges in sweets, what is going to happen at the end? Whenever we take an action with our mind, it leads to instant gratification. Mind always looks for instant gratification, whereas intellect goes for deferred gratification, meaning that it will be initially a bit painful, but at the end, it will always be happy. Mind wants only instant pleasure, like for eating. The taste of the sweet lasts in the mouth only the time it is in the mouth. And after the next day, what will happen? His sugar levels will come up. Then again, they have to take extra medication. And that's all the painful process. So we need to understand that when we analyze. So today's when you say what can be analyzed from us, we can always analyze the starting point of our actions. For each action that you do, you can analyze yourself whether you are doing the action driven by your mind or your actions driven by intellect. If the actions are driven by intellect, the hierarchy is followed and there will not be much of issues. But if the actions are driven by mind, then you need to understand, is it a good thing to do? Or you have to again take back to the root of intellect and gets the intellect approval before doing that action. So this is just a So this is small depiction on how our mind and intellect here, the feelings are generally represented with heart. So every time a conflict comes between our mind and the intellect, the mind is very easygoing. It doesn't care what happens tomorrow. It just wants to enjoy this moment because it never thinks. It just wants instant pleasures. So for everything, it's like whenever the intellect comes and says, no, this is not good, it says, shut up and let's do this because I want happiness, I want pleasure. And the thumb rule here is that you can follow your heart, but You always take your intellect along with you. Let your actions be driven by the intellect. So this is the first verse of chapter 1. Dhritarashtra uvacha dharmakshetre kurukshetre samaveta Mamakaः Pandavaschaiva Kimakurvata Sanjaya. I think most of you would have known the story of Mahabharata. So Mahabharata is the greatest epic of our Hindu mythology, and this is the setting stage of the battle where Kauravas, who are the son of Dhritarashtra. Dhritarashtra was a blind king. He was blind by birth, and his wife Gandhari would get herself blinded because he married a blind king. They had 100 sons, Kauravas, and Pandavas were Dhritarashtra's brothers' sons. So Kauravas and Pandavas were cousins. Pandavas were 5 of them, and Kauravas were 100 of them. And because of all the atrocities committed by Kauravas, finally a stage would come where they have to get into a fight for righteousness to get back whatever they have lost. So in the battlefield, the first verse of the Bhagavad Gita starts with Dhritarashtra talking something. Uvacha means speaking. So first verse starts with Dhritarashtra speaking. He tries to ask Sanjaya, who was his minister at the time, Dharma in the Dharmakshetra, which is the Kurukshetra, both of them are fighting. So what is happening there? What is happening to my sons and also the Pandavas? What are they doing, Sanjaya, is the question that has been asked by Dhritarashtra. And this verse has a very, very deep meaning. Each word has been analyzed to such an extent that there is a big book of just on explaining this verse alone. So you can take it in different perspectives and different kinds of things. Externally, if you take in the battle, it is very simple. Dhritarashtra is asking Sanjaya, what is happening there? What are my sons and the sons of Pandu? Pandu's sons are nothing but Pandavas. What are they doing there? It's just a simple question asked. But in that question, if you try to analyze, the first word that we see here is Dharmakshetre. And dharmam in Sanskrit has a couple of meanings. One, dharmam stands for righteousness. One meaning for dharmam stands for your essential nature. And when we say essential nature, it is the nature without which the thing cannot be that thing. Meaning, when we take a sugar, the essential nature of sugar is sweetness. Any place in the world, will we find a sugar which is not sweet? We cannot find. So the essential nature of sugar is sweetness. Similarly, the essential nature of fire is heat. Any place you go, you will not find a cold fire. So such is the essential nature. So when we apply this internally, what is the essential nature? Our essential nature physically is health and mentally is bliss, happiness. We are not having. That is why our essential nature has become a fight. Kshetram is the field. The field of essential nature has become a Kurukshetra. Kurukshetra is a battlefield. So we are fighting internally with ourselves to fight against our positive and negative tendencies, to do right things. When we are filled with lot of thoughts, we are filled with lot of negative thoughts. So every moment there is a fight happening in the battlefield of our mind. And in that context, what can we do? Why is this fight coming? And the second line says, Mamakaf Pandavas Chaiva Kimakurvata Sanjaya. Dhritarashtra is asking, Mamakaf means what are my sons? And what are the sons of Pandu doing? Why did this difference come in? Why can't he address both of them as my sons? They are just his brother's sons. They are not even person from the outside family. They are all from the same clan. They are all from the Kuru clan. But why is this difference coming? That's what we are trying to analyze. See, the person was blind. Being blind here refers to, he is anyway physically blind. But the blind here refers to looking at things, perceiving things. His ignorance has blinded him internally. That's why he is not able to feel that oneness. He is feeling that, oh, this thing is mine, this is not mine. This is ours and this is not ours. So that feeling has come because of his ignorance. And in Vedas or Vedantas, when we see, they would have said that the body that we are having is filled with, so we have mind and intellect. In simple terms, mind is like a virus in our body, and intellect is like antivirus software. What will the virus do? We all have systems, right? When we buy our computers, when we buy our laptops, we all buy the antivirus software along with this system that we buy, because we are afraid that there could be, when we download something, because we are exposed to the internet, we don't have restriction that we can go to this site, we can go to that site, and externally you cannot control anything. Which site is harmful, which site is harmless, you cannot actually know before entering that site or doing some activities in that site. That's why, as a matter of caution, we all first install the antivirus software. But if you see our body, our mind is a virus which is blind in nature, and it is programmed in a human body by birth. So its duty is to produce viruses. What is the antivirus software? It's the intellect. We have to strengthen our intellect so that the antivirus software within us is powerful enough to destroy all the viruses. And when the antivirus software doesn't work properly, we will be in the ignorant state. They say that Vishadam is depression. So Vishadam is a rogam, Vishadam is a disease, or the human body is a disease. What is the disease the human body suffers? Is the disease of ignorance. So what we have to do is to remove this ignorance through the yoga, so that we will realize ourselves, or we will get free from ignorance. That's why we have to take from this Vishada Rogam to Vishada Yogam. Here, this Vishadam, depression, is called as a yoga because the disease of depression is being dealt the right way, and finally it led to Yogam. And for any one of us to get into a self-study or get into a realization or transformation, we all need to have a trigger. If everything goes on peacefully, no one will look back and ask ourselves, who am I? Why are things happening to me? One or the other thing would have happened in our life, which would have made each one of us in this session to sit here to analyze ourselves. If nothing would have happened and nothing we would have thought of changing, we would not taken a step to come and understand things. So that Vishadam, that depressed state, that mental agitated state is the trigger, is the reason for you to do a self-inquiry, self-analysis, and change that into a yogam. If you don't deal with that properly and let that disease crop up, then we will finally end up taking antidepressants only. So here Kurukshetra is considered as the battlefield, and Dharmakshetra is the place where, or which is the land of righteousness. And when we have a land, when there is paddy, we see some weeds also grow in that land. At that time, what we do is we remove all the weeds so that the paddy grows well. In the same way, now this Dharmakshetra is having both bad and good people, meaning that it's a fight between Kauravas and Pandavas. So to have the righteousness, this fight is happening. And after this fight, what is going to happen is the upliftment of Dharma. So this is one of the analogy we give externally when we think Dharmakshetra as a piece of land. But when we think Dharmakshetra as a internalized thing, or when we apply it internally to our body, this is an analogy which is given by Swami Chinmayananda. So he compares all the Pandavas to our positive thoughts, Kauravas to our negative thoughts, and the battlefield to the everyday challenges that we face. And Krishna here is considered as a wisdom of self, Arjuna as an ordinary man or ego who is subject to all the mental disturbances. And the game of dice represents the uncertainties of life, because You cannot predict what is tomorrow. We know only what is now. You cannot know what is our state tomorrow, whether we will be there, we will not be there. We don't know. And what happens when we are doing some work, or what happens, no one knows. So we have completely uncertain life. There are a lot of uncertainties in our life. And the chariot is considered as a human body because chariot only drives us into, takes everyone into the world. So our human body is a vehicle that allows us to enter or to act in this world. And the reins or horses are considered as the minds or senses. So wherever the horse run, the chariot goes. So the reins should be controlled properly by wisdom, so that we will be able to eradicate all our negative thoughts, or strengthen our positive thoughts, and face our everyday challenges with ease. You have any questions?
No, Abhita.
No, Abhita.
So from the second verse, I'll be continuing in the next class, but I would like to end with a small story. There was a bird with two baby birds, and it used to live in one house. They started to repaint that house, and so it did not have place to live there. So it flies and takes its shelter in one of the church. It lived there for around 4 to 5 months, and after that, the church also starts. They start to repaint the church, and when they start to repaint the church, they again fly from there, and it will go to a mosque, and it will take the shelter there. It will stay there for about a year, and after that, it will go to some temple because their mosque also goes under some reconstruction work. And in the temple, it will again stay for some time. And when it is in the temple, the baby bird will actually ask, like, why are the humans called differently? They all look alike. Why are they called with different names? Then the mother bird will explain that we are always called as birds. Wherever we are called as birds. But when you see human, when he goes to a temple, he is called a Hindu. When he goes to a mosque, he is called a Muslim. And when he goes to a church, he is called a Christianity. And the baby bird will ask, how is it possible when wherever we go to a mosque and live, we go to a church and live, we go to anywhere and live. We are called only birds. We are not called, because we live there, we are not called as Hindu birds, or we are not called as Muslim birds, or we are not called as Christian birds. Why is it possible? And then the bird will, like, it's like a joke. The mother bird will say, that's why all the human beings are down and we are flying up. This is to just let us understand that there in the olden days, there was only one religion. Even 5,000 years back when this was written, there was no a concept of religion. The only thing that people followed was humanity and human religion. And with the study of Vedanta also, we are going to understand that we all are one and the same. And the common factor within every one of us is the end living principle, which is the life force. And there is no difference that we need to see among any one of us.